Welcome to day 2 of the World Cup Mood Board here on 99.94. Well, I'm coming to you live from a hotel with weird things on the wall, but that we don't need to worry about that. Let's talk about the cricket. This West Indies and Scotland game changed with rain, and I think if you're a Scottish fan, that has probably given you a form of PTSD, because that is what happened in the 2018 World Cup qualifiers when Scotland had a chance at beating the West Indies. Then there was rain, a little bit of DRS, and eventually Scotland did not make the tournament and the West Indies did. And what happened today? Scotland are smashing the ball everywhere, and then it rains. And when that stopped, so did Scotland's runs for a long time. Some of this, of course, was just the power play ending, and the rest of it was because West Indies were a flaming pile of crap in the power play. They had a chance to, think about things a little bit more and, move it around. But either way, Scotland were doing very well against West Indies, and then it rained and it changed. Which is weird because you think out of these two areas, Scotland would be slightly more used to rain-affected games than the West Indies would. But thanks to George Munsey's out-of-character anchor innings, one that seemed to really annoy him all the way through, which made it a delight for me to be able to watch it, they made it to 160 Scotland. And it was quite clear that that was not going to be a bad total, especially when Mark Watt continued his supremacy at Hobart. He's even adding tricks now. Now he can read on the field. This is his tweet, actually, about what he was reading. Don't bowl slot, it says. And someone on our Discord channel also said, bowl good. Both those are both good things to read. It may have been slightly more interesting than that. When I worked with Scotland, he wasn't a big analyst person. He wanted to know who was going to sweep and a few other little things about reversing and everything else. But he was pretty good with that sort of thing. But I think as he's leveled up to a high level of cricket, he's realized that his basic skill sets, as high as they are, don't quite translate over as much. And obviously he's developing as well, and he's doing that really well. In fact, he was really good in the last World Cup as well. And here is my video on him from that last World Cup. This spoiling plan that they've come up with. And they usually look at a batter and very quickly they can work out the exact line and length, quite often a cramping line and a back of a length. And they squeeze through wickets, through mishits, through sliding the ball through frustrating batters, really. They're just trying to stop you from hitting them for boundaries. And they do use little tricks from left arm spin, like the angle, sometimes the height, also the change of pace. But they're hitting hard lengths, just as left arm finger spinners. And they don't spin the ball much at all. And it doesn't seem to affect their bowling one iota. And you can't do what these guys do without being an incredibly smart cricketer. Hence the reading. That was a little bit like Jarrod on Jarrod, wasn't it? I didn't realize I was going to be in the shot for that particular clip. What is a non-spinning, strong Western spoiler left-arm finger spinner who bowls a lot of Yorkers and quite regularly bowls from 28 yards? I mean, all three of his wickets were from a mile away. You can see it in the photo on the right there, that he was just a mile back for some of his wickets. I don't know which ends he was always bowling at, but he was certainly at the South Pole for some of them. He may have been at Launceston for the others. But for those who don't understand it, and that's why I put a tweet in that someone sent through to me, it really affects your rhythm and your ability to pick up the flight specifically and the timing when someone changes the length of the pitch. I once played in a cricket game where we accidentally marked the pitch out 2 meters longer than everyone else, and not a single batter all the way through the game could time anything. I think that, being able to face a medium pacer with an extra couple of meters will help, and being able to face a spinner in that situation, it doesn't. The really interesting thing about Mark Watt is what he then does is he bowls it quite forcefully. So it's not that he's just tossing it up there and it's very slow. He's really still getting it up there fast, but from this longer distance, and it's really hard for the batters to pick it up. It's really quite clever. But the West Indies couldn't score off him, and we've seen that a lot with Mark Watt. And they also lost, a few wickets. At least Bolwell, but more on the back of Watt than anything else. But those two as a combination were just all over the West Indies as a spin unit. At least is more of a part-timer, but he gets a lot of turn, whereas Watt is more of a specialist bowler who doesn't really get any turn. But that was the period of the game where they completely took over. And it is important to note that this was not an upset. Scotland have reached the same stage as Ireland and Afghanistan. A win for them is no longer the biggest news in the world. It's still huge, and their fans should obviously celebrate it. But they're now at that point where we have to get used to them winning more and more often against these kinds of teams, because Scotland has been good for a very long time now. So last night I was on Edges and Sledges podcast, who are new to the 99.94 network. So if you've never listened to them before, certainly go over. Three friends talking about Indian cricket. They've been doing it for a bunch of years now. But I went over there and we did a preview show for the World Cup, despite the fact the World Cup had finished. But they start on Sundays, so they were almost there. And with that, I was asked about the West Indies qualifying, and this is what I said.
And we're going West Indies, Ireland in the other group to make it through.
I'll go West Indies, Scotland.
Qualify. Okay.
Yeah, I'll go West Indies, Scotland in that one.
But
I think that group, I think any of those four teams could qualify. UAE is played better than I thought today. I don't think UAE has any chance of qualifying. Because I think in that other group, if you told me that Zimbabwe qualified, I'd be like, yeah, that's fair. Yeah. It's a really messy group. They say the group of death. That's more the group of what the fuck. There's my award-winning analysis there. Although, to be fair, my analysis has not won any awards. But let's just break down this game for the West Indies. They were really bad at the start, as I talked about before. In that power play, they completely lost their mind a little bit there. And then later on, they also struggled towards a death. That is something that I've talked about before. They're not really set up to be a great a bowling team unless Jason Holder takes a ton of wickets and Obed McCoy, anchors them. And in this particular game, that didn't happen. As for their innings, just didn't seem to really have clear plans for the Scottish spinners. They hold, and not to mention that they also hold out to a couple of fielders on the boundary as well when they were facing the seamers. So this is a team that on paper bats down to 10, so it shouldn't be a problem. But it kind of feels like they can bat down to 10, but no one actually bats long. You would want someone like Pooran to be able to do that for them, but maybe he's not quite in the form that he has been before. Obviously, Shamar Brooks is probably there for that as well. And Shamar Brooks is there because, do you know who would have been handy today? That Shimron Hetmeyer guy that you might have heard about before. So that was the end of the West Indies, game, but maybe not so much tournament. But as we've said before, you don't really want to fall behind in this. But if you go over now to someone that is doing a little bit better, it's Josh Little for Ireland. He stunned England with 4 for 45 when he made his ODI debut way back when. I think there's a few good higher-ranked teams than Ireland who would be more than happy to have Josh Little. I think he might have been in my Ireland preview as well. He's not quite the finished deal at the moment, but he's 3 for 29, against the West Indies in 2020. Again, a few years ago was very impressive. We've seen him in the 100. We've seen him play some very good games for Ireland as well. Played 5 games for the Manchester Originals in the 100. He actually bowled 100 balls exactly and finished with 13 wickets. And the most that anyone in that tournament got was 14. So this guy can play. And as I said, he's not fully developed yet. I don't even think we know what Josh Little is eventually going to be. But today he got Ireland off to a perfect start with a wicket from the second ball of the match. And considering what happened with the rest of the game, at that point, I was thinking that's not a great way for Zimbabwe to start their World Cup campaign. But I thought Little bowled really well all the way through again. He just looks like he's going to consistently take wickets at international level. I think we'll see him more and more in franchise cricket, especially after what happened with the 100. But essentially, it wasn't enough, was it? And we'll go on to Zimbabwe here, because Zimbabwe seamers basically ensured that Ireland got nowhere near chasing down their total. And based on his bowling today, I expect that we're going to see a lot more of Blessing Muzarambani. In fact, I don't know if this is true or not, but I heard a very good rumor that with Blessing Muzarambani that he almost signed up with Major League Cricket in America. We know he was playing as a coal pack before then. We know that he's done well for Zimbabwe since going back there full time. But no, maybe not as good as I thought he would have done. But in this particular tournament, he looked good. However, Sikandar Raza bowled really well as also, but it wasn't his bowling that won it for him. As I said, Josh Little got that early wicket against Zimbabwe, and then he came in at 37 for 3, Raza. And that was it, right? It was just timing and class, and he was completely on top of them. He made 82 from 48 with the bat. There was 5 sixes in that as well. That's a good chunk of Zimbabwe's 174 as well. And considering that no one else for Zimbabwe scored over 22, gives you a very good idea. He also, as I said before, bowled well, took the wicket of George Dockrell, another catch as well. So, if he was in your fantasy team, well done. And he should have been, because he was in my preview. And I said he's been in absolutely incredible form. He's got to be one of the more under the radar informed players in world cricket at the moment. He's by CricViz's average batting impact metric, he has the highest batting average impact of any batter in any year in T20I history. That's good, isn't it? In 2022, he's averaging 43 and striking at 154. That's good with new numbers and old numbers. What I'm saying is Sikandar Raza is doing really good. And I suppose that was the difference today. If he doesn't play that innings, I don't think they would be able to keep Ireland under that kind of pressure. Weirdly enough, we've talked about the real games so far, but there was also warm-up games, and nothing says this is a real World Cup more than teams playing warm-ups as the tournament has started. Well done to the ICC for allowing this to go on so consistently. This is the third World Cup we've done this now. Let's start with England, who probably weren't that pleased to have flown from Perth to Canberra for 2 games. David Willey, I think, might have even mentioned it at a press conference, especially as one of those games is actually rained off. And they ended up playing Pakistan, who they've already played like a bunch recently anyway. So I suppose that's okay. And of course, that was in Brisbane, and they've got an opener back in Perth. So they've been to Canberra, Brisbane, and now Perth. If you've never, looked into the geography of Australia, that's suboptimal. That particular Canberra to Brisbane's not too bad. Brisbane to Perth's not ideal though. I wouldn't want to fly it. It's basically like going to another country, and you can take that as an insult if you're in Perth or if you're in Brisbane. I don't mind which level of insult that goes to. It's probably also a good thing that Greta Thunberg isn't a cricket fan, or maybe she is. I don't know. Meanwhile, these warm-up games were televised for some reason, but closed to the public. So it meant that they were played in front of empty stands, but a lot of fans actually turned up to the ground and were not allowed in. That's incredibly ICC, isn't it? I'm sure there was a reason for that. They didn't think anyone would turn up or whatever that may be. But somehow we made a cricket game where people wanted to go and we didn't allow them. Anyway, it's probably best not to read too much into the warm-up results, of course. At least that's what New Zealand and Bangladesh will be telling themselves, because they both failed to make 100 in their performances against South Africa and Afghanistan, respectively. There's no real respect in not making 100, though, is it? Maybe we should have used a different phrase. Anyway, you get the point. There's another one as well. India played Australia in a warm-up, and I think there was actually a couple of notable things just worth mentioning here. Outside of Mohammad Shami's incredibly weird over that ended up with 4 wickets in 4 balls and stole the game, I suppose, for India in the end. Maybe not stole. They were doing okay at that point, but it was more touch and go, and then, there was a lot of wickets. But Australia have now used 5 openers in the last couple of months, maybe a couple of weeks. I didn't even check, but Warner, Finch, Green, Maxwell, and Marsh have now all opened for Australia of recent times. Not to mention that Steve Smith asked to go there. So there's a lot going up. There's a lot going on up top for Australia at the moment. Sky made some runs for India, which is great. Because in his career, he's basically not played in games outside of Asia, less than a handful in Ireland and the West Indies, a complete handful in England, and everything else he's ever played has been in Asia. It's not really how you want to turn up in the World Cup, and it's not ideal. Obviously, some of that was probably affected by COVID, but it was good that he made runs in this warm-up game against Australia, but I just think he needs to face as many balls as possible out in the middle in the place that they're going to play the entire tournament. Now, we've done the warm-ups. Should we check on the other team that played yesterday? Let's just check in on the mood of the Sri Lankan camp through our podcast on 99.94. Well, that doesn't look good to begin with.
Where to begin? I think we need to have some sort of collective therapy after that loss there. Absolute disaster, absolute nightmare. What a disaster. Sorry, I'm just like ranting now. Like, tell me something positive, Estelle. Was there any positives from yesterday's performance?
I don't know what kind of, performance you can call this. That's why I said, like, it's very hard to describe the loss. I know it was not going to be easy for Sri Lanka. The final.
I'm not sure that cut out a little bit there, but did Estelle just say it may not be easy for them to get to the final? I like the dark humor, but I am a big fan of Mark's face there. Yeah, it's going about as well as we thought it was going to be with the Sri Lanka fans at the moment. But if you haven't checked out the Sri Lanka 99.94 podcast, that's Estelle and Mark. And I suppose even if you're not a Sri Lankan fan and you just want to feel better about your life, maybe it's worth going over and listening to those two for a little bit of added misery. But for the Sri Lankan fans, I've done an advanced analysis of the future using the most up-to-date meteorological services I had to hand. Thank you, Google. And on Tuesday, it is not supposed to rain in Geelong. So, yay! Of course, the next lot of games after that are on Thursday. And as it's currently scheduled, there is supposed to be rain there. So, no. So what does this mean? If you're Namibian or Dutch, you just want your team to win that game. I think whoever does is in a great position, especially if the rain does come on Thursday. The game on Tuesday that isn't involving those two, obviously Sri Lanka, UAE, and UAE are the weakest team in that group. Not to, it's certainly worth mentioning that they bowled very well in the last game, but they also, didn't score a ball in that particular game. So it was a bit ordinary from that point. For Sri Lanka, they should be thinking about that as a chance to sort out their net run rate problem, which currently has them last in that group. But if Namibia lose to Netherlands and not by much, I think that might be the worst result for Sri Lanka because it means that Netherlands and Namibia will both have a positive net run rate. And it means that it's going to be tough for Sri Lanka to overhaul that in one game if the following game is washed out. So it's, I'm not saying it's bad for Sri Lankan fans yet. It's not, you're out of the tournament yet, but it could end up that way. It could certainly go in that thing. And I think there's also a danger for Sri Lanka if they go hard because they do give the UAE more of a chance. And this is the thing, and cricket teams find this really hard. There may just not be any rain on Thursday at all. Weirdly enough, of course, there is a cricket ground about an hour and 10 minutes away from Kardinia Park that has a roof. And we're not using it. So no cricket at the Docklands. Instead, we're down at Kardinia Park. And it does, it's a coastal area. It gets some rain from time. It's in Victoria. Victoria gets some rain when it's not in massive drought. So I think all of that is a bit awkward. UAE still look like they're going to struggle to get huge totals based on what we've seen so far. Although I thought that Wasim showed glimpses at time of what we have seen him do against teams like Ireland before. The bigger problem for Sri Lanka is that if UAE manage to get that amount of reverse again, then Sri Lanka are going to have to respect them because there were some pretty good Dutch batters getting ripped through the other night. So I think that if you're looking for the most fun from Group A, you're looking for the UAE and Netherlands to win their games. That makes it great fun for everyone except all the Sri Lankan fans. I actually started off with that trying to be nice to Sri Lanka, and then I went in a dark area. Anyway, as discussed yesterday, UAE's pink and blue kit, or purple and blue, I'm not really a colors guy, that established a very high benchmark, I think, so far for the World Cup. And the announcement also that its design is inspired by UAE's beautiful winter, which is got to be up there for the stupidest PR line we've seen from the World Cup so far this tournament. But meanwhile, we saw today that Scotland persisted, I should say, with their purple kit. Here's the lovely George Munsey, who anchored that innings today. They had some strong blue and white ones, but of recent times they've been going with purple. I'm not sure what their meaning of that is. I don't know if purple is a beautiful winter in Scotland. It's probably not, is it? However, away from the main action, the teams at the ICC haven't forced to requalify, have been warming up, and Pakistan have shown why you just can't rule them out of major tournaments. They turned up for their match with England with these incredible green neon trousers, and it was just their training gear as well. That's a strong look from training gear, which is usually doesn't really have that much swag to it, does it? Of course, this makes total sense for Pakistan. It's basically the quick kit equivalent of their uncanny knack of always seeming to have a new fast bowler in the wings when one of their old ones gets injured. Speaking of which, they're delighted to see that Shaheen Afridi make his return from injury, even as they lost by 6 wickets. But it says a lot, really, that we have ended up this particular show, where Scotland did incredibly well talking about Pakistan's parts. But why not? Thank you to everyone. Great work again by Charlie and Muku there on the show. And let me just have a look if we've got any questions, and we'll see what is coming up. And I'll do a couple here. Who are your top 5? This is from Pranav S. Who would be your top 5 left-arm finger spinners currently? And does Mark Watt make the list? Do you know what? Pardon the pun. I think I might ask Barrett this, because I was thinking the same thing. I want to go through the list and see where Mark Watt would end up. I think, Pranav, that's a really, really interesting question. You've got Imad Wasim. I suppose you've got Jadeja. You've got Akshar Patel. I mean, I'd have him ahead of Zampa. Maharaj is an interesting one. I'm going to have to go through and do the numbers. I might have a look at, CricViz or Intelligent Cricket's numbers to see what they come up with it, because I think you make a really fair point. He's a fantastic cricketer. I haven't done a big video on him this time. Sorry, Waddy. Although he's a reader now, probably doesn't watch videos anymore. But if you go back to last year in the World Cup, I talked about why he's so successful. Hopefully Muku will be able to put a link up in the show notes for this one there. But I think he was fantastic. Ross says, glad to see your hard work with Scotland paying off. I don't think I can claim too much. There's a couple of little things that Scotland were doing in this particular game, Ross, where I did think, maybe I had a hand in that. But I think they were coming together as a team before I was involved. And I think they're smarter now. They're getting more professional all the time. They've had some setbacks over the last couple of years as well. Obviously problems with their CEO and problems with their finances during COVID. But no, I think they've been really, really good. But yeah, it's absolutely no doubt. For me, I have a personal connection, but it's also just great to see them in Namibia, who I just think are both very smart teams, coming along and playing good cricket, and with Zimbabwe winning as well. It's been great to see the less favored teams do really well in this World Cup so far. Any views on the Aussie warm-up collapse? Not really. I mean, you're going to collapse in T20 games anyway, especially in warm-ups. I don't think we can take too much from any of those things. It was, the whole game was a bit odd. If you have a look at some of the other things that went on, Mohamed Shami banging one over at the end, for instance. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. But it was, I wasn't watching it. I was following it on Crick Info and CrickBuzz, but it seemed fun. Not That Hunter says, why do you think Ireland use Dockerell's bowling anymore? He always looks useful when he comes on. Basically can only bowl to right-handers is part of the reason. And he had the yips a little bit. He started to build his bowling back up, I think, George Dockerell. But for a long time, Not That Hunter. What, Hunter Biden? Is that a Hunter Biden? I'm not sure. But for a long time, he lost it. And he's rebuilt himself as a batter. I really respect him. I want to get him on my podcast one time and just talk about his career, because I love when people do things like that. It's absolutely, it's brilliant. I love when professional athletes change. We had another one today. Callum McLeod started as a seam bowler for Warwickshire and ended up as a batter for Scotland and Durham. And, I did a podcast with him about that once. I love when players change mid-career, because I think it shows real dedication to trying to improve yourself as a player. And I'm just going to head off, but I'll just see if there's anything else here. And let's see what else we have just coming through. Nick Honor said, what team has the best and worst kit? Look, I'm gonna have to wait to see everyone's. I don't think I've seen a bad kit. UAE almost always win that for me. I'm hating some of their kits over the last few years. But I want to see all the teams, give it a couple of games, and just see how I go with it so far. But I really do like that UAE kit. It did surprise me. Horse with no username. If the rain keeps coming over the next 2 weeks, could we see an equivalent of Kenya making the 2003 World Cup semis? No, I don't think so. I don't think it'll get quite that far. But you're right. It's it makes a T20 tournament more random. But if you have a look in the video, it's not due to rain every day in Geelong, for instance. I did look at Hobart's, but I can't remember Hobart's off the top of my head. But it's going to be played everywhere. Australia's a big place. It's not like other places where, a cloud can come in and sort of cover 2 or 3 different venues, right? In Australia, it's so big. Chances are that the rain isn't going to play a big part unless, the whole country is under a cloud. And that's very hard to do in Australia. Lucky music. I'll finish with you. Any possibilities that Sri Lanka go through to the next round? Yeah. Lucky, it's very possible. They could win their next 2 games. They're not out of it. We don't know if it's going to rain on Thursday. You have to take it one washout at a time. No, I still think that, put it this way. If you go back to the video and you can see me talking about West Indies, I was very unsure about West Indies coming in. I think rightfully now, having seen how they played, and I could easily have seen Zimbabwe, Ireland, or Scotland going through from that group. 2 of those teams going through from that group instead of the West Indies. I didn't feel the same with Sri Lanka. I still think a firing Sri Lankan team, and they should be inspired, if nothing else, at the moment, can make it through to the next round. But rain is not ideal. But if they have a good bounce back against UAE and then they get their game against the Netherlands, there's still definitely a chance. But that's it. Both of these groups are now absolutely interesting. And how great is it that, to start this World Cup, the ridiculous venues in the middle of the day, weekdays in Hobart to start the tournament, all these sorts of things have happened. A requalifying event, but we've had 3 underdogs out of the 4 games. And to be fair, UAE went like a ball or 2 from being 4 underdogs. So far, we've just had absolutely great cricket. Going to be here every day. Chuck in your questions at the end of the show, and I'll try and get to as many as I can. But now I'm off to have a look at this lovely wall art behind me. We'll see you next time. Or Muku's not listening. Muku?